call this regular meeting of the Great Island Advisory Committee to order on June 25th at about 7:15 p.m. I'd like to remind everybody that there will be a July 9th meeting for GIAC, and I was going to suggest hybrid, although after tonight, I'm going to take today's situation under consideration, and we may be hybrid, we may be in a room. That will be to be determined. So, okay, Felicia, any public comment?
Right, you would need to raise your hand on the Zoom app because we don't have access to your voice or video, so. And there is none on my end.
Okay, next item is an update from the Department of Public Works, and Tony Campanella is going to give us that.
Hello, everybody. Tony Campanella, Public Works. On June 17th, we started the tree work to the left of 23A. We anticipated that taking 5 to 7 days. It took 3.5 days, so we're happy with that. And that work was started based on the availability of the contractor. Our next significant date for this work is July 7th, which we're going to start kind of the prep work to do the construction, erosion control, tree safety, things like that. And then either the 21st of July or the 28th of July, kind of based on weather, when they get off the jobs that are on now, we will start the construction. And at that point, we will return to weekdays closed until 4 p.m. for pedestrians, and open after 4 p.m. and weekends. And that's all, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Tony?
Thank you.
Tony, I just have one. So
Yes.
will you be able to give us, the community, some notice on the 21st and the 28th?
As much notice as we can. I assume we're going to be able to give some decent notice on that. And we'll put it on the BMS boards that are down at Pear Tree Point and in front of the entrance to the Great Island, and I'm sure all the social media will be handled as well. And the town website, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony.
You got it.
Okay, next item is Reed Hildebrand.
Thank you, Monica. I have a question.
I just wanted to, so sorry, when you asked for public comment, my whole screen isn't showing everyone on one, so I might have missed, because I'm seeing two now that I'm scrolling, and I do want to give that opportunity, but I wanted to check in with you first, so I apologize that.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Should I go ahead and share? We have two.
Yeah, well, yes, maybe one
Okay.
at a time, but
Yes, I will ask the first person, Alexis Sweet, to unmute.
Okay, here we go. Are we all set? Alexis Sweet, 20 Beverly Place. I'd like to speak tonight not just as a resident, but as someone who has genuinely tried to engage in good faith with questions, with patience, and with a real desire to understand how decisions are being made. But I have to be honest, it's becoming incredible.
Alexis, you froze.
Hey Felicia, can you hear us?
I could hear you, yes.
Okay.
I also have her frozen on my end.
What? Sorry, do you need me to stop?
No, we lost you after you said,
Yeah, Alexis, why don't you start over? That way you can have your full 2 minutes. We lost you there for a minute, or a few seconds. You still there?
She's muted.
she's muted.
Alexis, you want to unmute yourself? Or
I
Felicia?
am unmuted. Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Yeah.
All right, let's hope nothing glitches. Sorry about that. Okay, Alexis Sweet, 20 Beverly Place. Speaking tonight not just as a resident, but as someone who has genuinely tried to engage in good faith with questions, with patience, and a real desire to understand how decisions are being made. To be honest, it's incredibly frustrating to keep asking the same basic questions and not get any real answers. I've asked more than once why the town is moving ahead with Great Island Entrance Road expansion now, when the construction on the island side isn't yet designed, it isn't permitted, and best case, it won't be shovel ready until next spring. On its own, 23A is a road to nowhere, and I would add, widening it prematurely turns it into a gateway to chaos. I've also asked just as plainly for public clarification on zoning, specifically how the town plans to allow private events on a residentially zoned property. Are private events such as weddings, which would constitute a commercial use of public land, zoning compliant? If they are not, or if they would depend on obtaining discretionary residential zone special permits, we need to know, because the entire event policy discussion and parts of the master plan may be on the wrong track. Most importantly, it bears repeating that the majority of residents, through surveys and other forms of input, have consistently expressed a desire for Great Island to remain a place for passive recreation and ecological preservation. Continuing to pursue high-intensity uses such as recurring private events runs counter to that public input and undermines the very process meant to guide this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And then we had one more person, Sabelle. And you are unmuted now, or asked to unmute. Oh, thanks.
Sorry, I actually was just listening in tonight, but I would second everything that I heard from Alexis just before me. She expressed it very well. So thank you very much.
Would you mind stating your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you still hear me? This is Sabelle Stewart at 25 Old Farm Road in Tokenique.
Okay. Anyone else, Felicia?
Not on my end.
It was Sophie, there was a Sophie at one point.
There was this, nobody else with their hand up?
I don't have any hands up on my end.
Okay. Okay, seeing no more, we're going to go back over to Becca.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everyone. And yes, thank you for your patience. We are excited today to talk primarily about three things. One is this first action around adding some places to sit and take pause and enjoy the island. So some early furnishings, and we can pull up a deck to share with everyone about that. The other two things that we're going to talk about is that there were some questions the last time we met about a little bit more clarification around planting and materials and accessibility, and so we thought we would share some information about that, all of which is included in the upcoming draft of the master plan. And then we thought we would review the master plan key phasing and components and make sure that any questions or any discussion that still needs to be had, we have time to have tonight. And that's basically the agenda for this evening. So if we could begin with the furnishing.
One second. Can everybody see that, or can you see it on your screen? Do we need that blown up? If not, if you're good. Are you good? Everybody's got their own?
I got it here.
Okay, all right, that's great.
So I think there's been much discussion amongst the community and this committee about trying to get some place to sit on the island. We wanted to basically summarize a set of criteria that are important for those provisions, and they're all listed here. I think making sure that we fit in with the sort of ethos of durability, that everything that is purchased for the island will be long-lasting and be sort of have high environmental performance is important. Making sure that the ADA accessibility provisions and goals for the community and the island are met, that we place things with a sort of elegant approach, and that things are sort of sensible, but also knowing that we're trying to unroll change in a slow way that's very flexible and adaptable as improvements are made, that everything should be able to be moved and to be very heavy so that we don't, set those who are caring for the island up with any problems, that they basically, hopefully these pieces of furniture can get set and then a little bit forgotten, and then moved if desired. We shared some of the design criteria in terms of the architectural alignment in this document as well. And then I'm just curious, does anyone have any questions about this set of criteria? No? Great. So we can go to the next. We wanted to put together a kind of simple recipe in terms of basically some typical benches that you would find in open spaces, particularly historic open spaces, a few picnic tables and benches, because there's been repeated requests for people to be able to bring, something to sit down and set up either a little lunch or laptop, so people can refresh themselves. Lots of requests for smaller tables and chairs that are flexible and can be moved for sun and shade. And then I think enormous appetite for being able to take in the view, and as you see all over beautiful old homes or Adirondack and inns, Adirondack chairs do that very well. So that's sort of the menu that we came up with. If we go through particular options, basically we were seeking to come up with a wide array to make sure that we were thinking through things kind of clearly and giving everyone a chance to weigh in. I think the Kevin Lynch and Sons products are very appealing to us. They are used around the nation in sort of environments like Great Island, and it is a Connecticut company that's not very far away. So to the extent that we're hoping to support our state and the people who are making beautiful things in the state, there's a kind of nice story there as well. Go to the next. They had a couple of different products that we looked at. This was one I'm sure everyone in this room at least has sat on, the Central Park bench, very famous. Next. And then some more contemporary ones that are used widely on projects that we've worked on and many others. This is very popular for North campuses that we've worked with. Next. So then we get to these picnic tables. And I would invite either Felicia or Monica to speak about these projects, because you all got to go and visit actually the location where they're made yesterday.
Yes.
And test them out. I told Monica that we mostly don't like to make recommendations or purchase anything without actually having gone to sit and test and feel and touch. So they launched a rapid actual visit yesterday.
Yeah, the visit was super interesting. They make the furniture right there. I wasn't able to sit at the picnic table because they order that wood in, and so they didn't have that. But they do have two benches that we're considering. One is this is the World's Fair, and it was actually designed by Kenneth Lynch, the grandfather, and he worked with Mr. Olmsted, and that is the actual what it looks like. And then this is the Park Central bench. Somebody just made them for these for them, so you can take a look. They had different materials, and one of them is the plastic. So we got some samples. This is the plastic, and then these are just some colors. This is the wood, and Becca, you can speak a little bit more to the actual, the type of wood and why they chose that. But this would be the wood that's in those.
You said why they chose it. Who chose it?
Why we're looking at this versus this.
Yeah, I'll just say that particularly for this kind of furniture, we have found that we don't see the same long-term performance in the non-wood products, and that we spec'd a bunch of them about 10 years ago and 5 years ago, and they're actually failing at a greater rate than the wood products that we're using.
How do they fail?
They start to splinter and break, and so it's a frost heave. I think if you're able to keep them in sort of more limited thermal conditions, maybe it's not the same issue, but our projects are all really in the elements. So this is a very stable and environmentally sort of validated product, and so that's our recommendation. And I don't know, Felicia, you have spent hours and hours looking into this. Do you feel? Yeah, there's also a touch factor actually. Stickiness.
Yeah, I was going to just say that I would only add that it is also there's a comfortability in the materials when you sit on the HDPE, the recycled plastic lumber, versus the Cameroon wood. There's a huge difference, and so that would be the only other reason I would definitely lean towards the wood.
Did Kenneth Lynch say anything about the materials? But during your visit, good choice.
Yeah, this is, the wood is very popular. It lasts for, I think, what did she say, Felicia, 25, 35 years on the wood
20.
option?
Yeah, minimum 25 years, 35, etc. So they have a very long-term lifespan.
Does that wood get treated periodically with some sort of oil?
No,
No?
just gets cleaned.
Yeah.
We have that at home, we power wash it every year, it looks like brand spanking new,
Yeah.
10 years old.
And then they had a couple of colors for the ironwork, so if you take a look. The green is, so the Park Central style is actually in Central Park, and it's with the green, but they also had floor samples with the black, which looked terrific, so.
And I think we like the black for Great Island because all the other details on the island seem to be either very dark gray or black. You can keep moving through, but it is exciting to actually go to a place and feel very confident and satisfied by that.
Just one question, I think
Yeah.
it's a nit, but Central Park and Park Central is the same bench? They have railings, right, or armrests?
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
saying it wrong, it's the. Parks-
Either way, this
yeah.
Central doesn't have
Yes.
the armrest,
It does,
so it's
it
not.
has, they have armrests and they also, yeah. Actually, Felicia, can you talk about the modification to make them accessible?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michelle. And if we're looking at this one or the World's Fair bench, either one, the armrests are optional on all the benches. We recommend at least the side ends in terms of, accessibility reasons. The center modification does allow for longer term longevity because it adds more support. So that's something to consider. Either way, having it with it or without will not change the price. So it's just an option.
So Felicia, you can remove that thing.
The center.
The middle.
The center, correct.
Okay, let's maybe move to the next slide, but there was some story about that. Great, thank you. So these are the more lightweight option, and we did want to have something that potentially was even easier to move around. I think, as we've discussed with lots of people more, our sense is that having something heavier is actually more desirable for the island. Next. And then this is the most contemporary option that we suggested, and this is a very popular campus and park product, and the reason people like it is that you can slide it around on lawns, so you're not producing too much shadow, but it's also very, very heavy, so it doesn't blow over, and it feels quite solid. Next. So then we weren't sure how much the hope was going to be able to put all the furniture away all the time. And this sort of bistro furniture is the most popular to be able to store very quickly, and it does hold up. And then we wanted to have an option that could stay put if we keep going. So these all fold, and then this table, the Park Center table, doesn't collapse. It's is movable, but it stays put. And same with the Park Center chairs that are shown next, and they, like the other options, come with arms or without arms. Just a few more, I think you can just move through them, because I do think everyone has had a chance to look. So any questions or discussion?
Just viewing it out of context, the Park Center table looks a little bit higher, and I don't know if you've looked at them in conjunction with the chairs.
It's very comfortable, actually, yes. I agree with you. I think it depends on exactly the angle the photo is taken.
Yeah.
Yes, this is sort of flattering for the verticality of this table.
So are all the tables the same height?
They,
This one's 27.
this
so
is
it's-
a little bit taller, I think, right? I don't know, Felicia, do we have we didn't make a comparison matrix.
No, this is 27 as well.
I could pull the heights for you. I'm not sure if they're all the same off the top of my head, but I'll pull the heights for you real quickly. 1 second.
They seem to be.
They're close. Most furniture like this is held to very tight tolerances because things are specified to be kind of comfortable and meet code.
I saw that the World's Fair picnic table benches have both a curved seat and a flat seat in these photos. You have an option or an opinion on which one you prefer?
Yeah, Felicia, can you take that?
Yeah, there's the curve.
That is correct. You can pick or choose more of the contour or curve style bench. It is, I would say that it's a difference of aesthetic and a difference of comfort again. So obviously the flat one's gonna have cleaner lines. The curved has more of the like iconic look to it. But it is personally, and I think Monica can also agree when we sat in both of them, the contours will naturally offer a little bit more comfort to your body.
And I think one of the strengths of the World's Fair bench, which is when we initially put forward a recommendation, we had recommended that because in our experience that's the bench that people find most comfortable. And having the rounded back and the extra height, it just offers a lot of support.
Yeah, I think the world bench, I found it, I'm not like a really big person, and I found the park one a little short.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you're a big guy, you're going to be more comfortable on the other one.
That's been our experience asking around.
Which is the park one? So this is World's Fair. Which one's park?
You're looking at
World's Fair
picnic
is
tables, so
more
we're talking
So
benches.
this is the,
Wait,
sorry,
sorry.
can you go to
The benches.
bench? Yeah. Come on.
So this is the.
So the Central Park has just the two slats.
But I mean, in terms of like the picnic set, this is one you were saying.
It's the same though, it's the same concept. This bench is not as
Yeah.
comfortable. This one is more comfortable than the other one. And
There is only the World's Fair picnic table set. The difference is you can choose to have your benches more of that straight, streamlined look or with the contour curved seating.
yeah.
And the height of the bistro table is 30 inches, so it's 30 wide and 30 height. Coming back to that.
Big concern on the Central Park, the bench, not the picnic table bench, that with the two slats that for shorter people or children, that they're not gonna get really any back support at all.
Right. I think
That looked really uncomfortable.
I
Shorter people.
I think given that we're actually not purchasing very many right now, right? I think at the moment it's a purchase of 4 that we would distribute quite widely at key sort of intersections and important moments on the island to offer people comfort. I think our sense is that proceeding with the World's Fair, if you're curious about what we think, would make a lot of sense. And then if going forward there is a bigger appetite for many benches, you could imagine that actually the two kinds of benches can actually go together too. So I don't think in the future we're saying you could never see a Central Park bench on the island, but this one, given its advantages, seems like a really good place to start.
And the World Fair one, just looking at those, like the feet on the bottom, it seems like that would fit perfectly on a super flat surface.
Yeah.
Are there things that you kind of screw to the bottom if you have it on like a lawn?
Yeah, so you can pin it, and I think one of the things that is not included, but we would work very closely with Public Works, and I suspect since you're your attorney, I'm going to call on you, but I think we would try to figure out what's the sort of least damaged, most sensitive way if we want to actually pin them into the ground. And we may be able to just put some deep, long pins into the lawn without disturbing anything.
Because I was saying more like if you just put in like those 6 feet, like on soft lawn, will they sink in? Do you need to put a skid, if you will, on the bottom of those?
When we did an initial walkthrough, we identified locations where you would actually probably be able to find a really level piece of ledge or pavement, because I think that's easiest. And in the future, when we actually start building things, there'll be little cutouts. If you start to pay attention to how benches normally go along the park path, there's a little notch that's added out like a tab, and the bench will sit on that, and so it's flat and very secure.
And then you can anchor it in.
and you can anchor it in. But we're not at that point, obviously, right now.
And Becky, can you speak to the length?
Yeah, our recommendation is always to get the longer length. So in general, we don't ever like to specify a bench that's less than 8 feet long. And there's a proportionality because benches sort of sit in large horizontal landscapes. The longer they are, the more elegant they are. And they just end up looking as though they sort of don't fit, and you want to do 3 of them, and you're missing the friends for the bench when you specify the shorter ones.
I had asked that question because I looked around once, I saw the 8 feet, and I was on Martha's Vineyard, and every bench was 6 foot wide. Cove Park, every bench is 6 foot wide, and these are 8 feet, and so none of those places have you as a recommender.
Got it cheaper.
And they're yeah.
Well, the question is whether people will sit on them. If a couple's sitting on half of it, will somebody else sit on the other half? Did you find that?
I think we have not, I just want to say, we've not done a major study of that. I think also because we're not putting very many out, we also really like the idea of having, so if someone sees someone coming up, hopefully if they're kind, nice people that you actually want to share a bench with, they'll scoot over. So, and if they're not, you probably don't want to share a bench
Oh,
with
that
them.
bar in the middle.
I was in the
helps,
bar in the middle,
actually.
Yeah, the bar would help.
invites like 2 groups, you know,
Yeah.
says, okay,
Yeah.
this is my side, and,
Yeah.
you know,
And natural.
a natural separation.
Do you think we need that bar in the middle? Or
We don't. So I think that's one of the questions.
On that item, same price either way, we can get them, and when one goes missing, we have the spares. If one's gonna break off, am I right, they're interchangeable probably.
Yeah, although I think one of the nice things about this particular product is I don't think it's likely to break.
Yeah.
But whatever,
Yeah. It's
Normally
happen.
that's a good argument,
Things
but I
happen.
think it's not, yeah, things do happen.
things happen.
Yeah. I will say though, I asked, and the only difference between the 3 arms and the 2, it's just that middle. The bottom still will have that support on the base. So there'll be 3 sets of legs. It's just a question of if you want 3 armrests or not.
My argument would be that in the middle of the day, somebody decides to take a nap on it and they eat up the whole bench because it is available just to sleep lengthwise. They're taking up the whole bench from everyone else who wants to sit there. So having the bar stops them from doing that.
Yeah, I think getting the bar, and then if we decide the bar doesn't work, we just get Tony out there.
Tony on a bad day.
I think that's really with the bar.
Yeah, I like the bar.
I think it's a beautiful bench.
It you know what, in person, it is beautiful. It really, it's so solid, and I think the difference between this one and the Central Park one is, I think you'll really like this one if this is what we go with.
What's next?
So, well, Becky, you want to talk about the collection?
Yeah, so if we go back, I think, to the first slide, that represents what Retail to Brand has pulled together after all the different conversations and the different kinds of feedback that we've heard. So it represents the World's Fair bench with the middle support, the picnic table, which would have 2 benches, one for either side.
Which would be curved, not flat like that.
Curved, correct. So it's a kind of all matched set. And then basically the bistro table that doesn't hold up, and the bistro chair that doesn't have arms so that you can sort of have more flexibility around a table. And then the Adirondack chair. That's our recommendation to you all.
Okay, I think in the option 1, you have half of the chairs have arms and half don't.
That is correct. I did do half and half. They do all stack even with arms, so storing isn't an issue. So sometimes having the versatility is nice, but of course you could always choose any quantity of with or without arms.
And to just speak on behalf of ARMS, from a sort of assist for people who do have a little bit more challenge it's nice, a lot of people do like arms. But
Push
people
up.
who, yeah, push up. So, that is why that's what we have in, I think in what we shared with you. But I think we're pretty flexible.
The Adirondack chairs, do they make those in like the iPay?
They do, and they make them in teak, and there's also a sort of cedar option, not from this company, but from another company. I think there was a preference, sort of from an operational point of view, the Adirondack chairs, because they get moved around so much that actually there's more durability with this specification. So we were thinking in some ways it would be consistent to have wood for everything. I think it's just maybe where you're headed, Jim. And we had some debate about that. I don't know, Felicia, if you would want to add anything about that. It's a good question.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
It's the question of whether the Adirondack chair, would we consider it or have recommended it in wood as well? But I think there was a
Right.
recommendation that that's not so good.
Right. The HDPE is very durable, and it does offer a little bit more of a modern contrast, and putting this into the, putting the Adirondacks closer ideally to the vistas, the coastline, it might be a little bit more susceptible to things like natural conditions. So having it be a little bit more durable to salt, wind, etc., that is something to consider in terms of not choosing the typical wood that it would come in.
And this is a product that we started specifying more than 10 years ago.
Is that what this stuff is?
It actually feels different. It has more texture to it. It doesn't feel as plasticky for some reason. It is still plastic. We have seen no degradation of this. So so in general we've had a problem with this, but we have several museums and campuses where we inspected these 10 years ago, and they're all being used regularly with no change. So we feel confident in this particular product.
Is the wood option something soft like cedar, or is it the actual like iPay, like durometer of iPay?
I think we, because it is a vernacular sort of piece, you can find it in every option.
The only question I had on the Adirondack chairs, it says it's curved. Is that referring to the top?
The top,
curve,
yeah.
not the curve? Some of them have the curved back.
It also does have actually a slight curve back.
Thank you.
Felicia, do they come with cup holders or no? No?
Have a refilled brand cozy.
Not this time. The arms are actually an option, so they can have the armrests are wide enough where you could put your cup on the armrest.
I mean, based on the experience in the parks, the chairs are gonna move around.
Yes.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
They also come with mountable options or anchors as well. So if you wanted to secure it a little bit more, that is an option.
That was kind of my thought, like if people are gonna move, people will definitely like move around unless we nail them down, and so I just wasn't sure, like, did we want everything to look like it's wood? Like natural products that existed 200 years ago.
I think it's a good question.
Any other questions? Okay, you want to go to the price sheet?
Sure. Which is maybe a little hard to see.
Yeah. I think most everybody has.
If someone is talking, it does seem as though we have lost the audio.
It's just very quiet.
Oh, okay. Just making sure. Okay, great. I can hear you.
So I assume we're looking at mix one because that's what we leaning towards, more we're leaning towards.
So this one has We have 18 chairs with no arms, 18 chairs with arms, and 12 of the Park Center round tables, 14 of the Adirondack, 4 of the World's Bench Fair with armrests, and 6 of the picnic table sets. Do you want to go through it all, how we came up with those numbers? Except for the fact that we also have that in our planning and zoning map.
Sure, I'm happy to, if it's helpful. I think that initially we had not thought about having picnic tables, and we had also not thought about the Adirondack chair, but as we walked the island and talked more about what people have been asking for, it became clear that we weren't going to meet the need for people to be able to have a little something to eat or to have kind of group conversations, and also from an accessibility point of view, adding the picnic tables really adds a whole other level of provision on the island. And then additionally, once it became clear that that was very important, offering a kind of furniture that could be moved to get in some of the shade or take in a vista, or if you wanted to be by yourself or wanted to be by a group out on, where we're not leveling the ground yet because we're not there, just seemed like a really nice thing to be able to offer people. And that's sort of how we ended up with those numbers. I think there was, and I mean, Felicia, you've done all the careful calculations about this, but there was a lot of requests for the ability to potentially be able to host, some kind of small group activity or gathering, and there's been so much conversation about that getting the numbers of the smaller tables that were they're labeled here as the forecourt seating seemed right. And the thought is that they can be arranged to be in the shade and on the 2 sides of the stable's forecourt. And because we've set that up with furniture twice for the different outreach events, it doesn't look very big as a space as you're walking up to it, but it really swallowed up the furniture that we brought amazingly. So we think that these numbers may seem a little high, but actually we think that they'll feel actually a really quite modest addition to that area.
Do you see that the picnic tables in the stable area and the bistro furniture clash at all?
I think that they'll go nicely together. We also, think the idea that potentially there may be an occasion where you want a picnic table over by the greenhouse, or we also thought that area that's currently the dressage area, that it might be nice sometimes for some kind of event to move them over there. So we really like the flexibility.
When traveling through the parks, the picnic tables are incredibly popular in all of the parks. I just see, families or, nannies with children or whatever, even, Baker Park, which we redid, every time I drive by, there's people spread out at the picnic tables and they're giving kids snacks and juice and having rests. And I would say our community really, really actively uses picnic tables.
It's been
everywhere we have them.
So I think this is a great combination, and I think the numbers work. I think it would be great if somebody like Lori would go out with you and maybe help decide where things should go for the best view and most, best usage, if that makes sense. And if anybody else wants to join, that would be great. Maybe Jim,
Sure.
Okay. Any further discussion on this?
Just a math question. I noticed like on mix 1, there's like 36 chairs and 12 tables. It's like 3 per. And I noticed on mix 2 and 3, there's 34 and 12. Is the idea like just have 3 chairs per table?
That was, I think we wanted flexibility. We thought about just 2, then we thought about 4, then it felt like that was too many. And so then, I don't know if we drew it as 2 and then 4 and then just decided that 3 would be a good starting place. I don't know. But Felicia, you've thought through this. You should maybe answer that more carefully.
It is both. It is the combination of how many could we get. So to be perfectly transparent, I put as many as I thought would fit around the table without it being too crowded, rather than going on the minimum side. So again, if you needed to order less, that is always an option, but I would recommend at least 3 per table is a very nice number.
But we're limited to 48 chairs, and this adds up to 50. So we're gonna take
So we
2
gotta
out
cut 2
someplace.
out, okay.
Okay.
Did you hear that remark, Felicia?
No, I did not.
We're limited to 48 chairs,
So we would cut.
Mhm.
so we need to
two.
cut 2.
Okay,
Okay, we can do that.
so 17.
To 40, what do you mean by 48? We only have 34 and 36 chairs, right?
No, we got 18 and 18 and 14.
One has like 36 chairs, and 2 and 3 have 34.
36, and then you have the
Okay, I think if you wanna clarify that we can only have, did I say 48?
Yes.
Not my decision, the RTM.
Yeah,
Approved
that's fine,
48.
that's fine. We wanna conform with.
So which chairs are we taking the 2 out of?
Just pick.
That's what we have Felicia for.
Should be Felicia surprised.
Yeah, I think we take it out of the,
Bistro.
yeah.
I'll
I
take
think
it
we
out.
take
Take it out of
the-
bistro.
One
Have
of, one
more
with no
Adirondack
arms.
and less bistro?
Yeah.
I like
Keep the
that.
Adirondack quantity.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
just scattered
the-
those around.
I think, but how about one with no arms gets removed and one with arms gets removed?
And those people, you're gonna shuffle between tables, somebody says, oh, do you need that extra chair, and they'll move around and whatever.
But setting aside like the RTM, like the number, you think like the right count is either 2 or 3 in each table? I'm just trying to figure out.
I think so.
And I will just say, Felicia spent a lot of her previous life in the event and restaurant industry,
Yeah.
and so she's quite expert. More than most of us in this room.
They're all gonna get moved around.
Yeah, but about like how, what
But it's not like we're gonna have 3 or 4 people sitting there eating like a 5-course dinner on a
Yeah.
30-inch table.
No.
It's just gonna be like sitting there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also if you look at this kind of thing, some people pull a chair off and they don't even want a table and, you know, so I think to go back to something that I feel like has been said in many recent meetings, this is a sort of pilot effort. We're gonna try and do something beautiful and comfortable for the island, but these numbers are actually quite small. And so there's been plenty of room to add if one of these is a runaway hit. And I don't think it's an over investment if for some reason, you know, someone ends up thinking one of these isn't the, you know, that's enough, we don't need to add more.
All these items kind of like plastic and they've been
They're very
manufactured for a
classic.
while, so if
Yeah.
we wanted to add to them, the chances that they wouldn't be discontinued is.
Correct, yeah, these are all products that
I don't think the
use-
World's Fair one is going away.
Not that one, I was thinking more of the, the bistro.
The bistro one is truly one that we have used for so many different institutional processes. I think we, including like Harvard Business School, and it just holds up.
Maybe we could end up doing a bench program like we have, at the beaches and for the parks where people donate a bench and put a plaque on it,
Yes,
to honor somebody, and I could see that being really popular.
yeah, would love to look into that, absolutely. Any further thoughts?
Are those shipping charges based on minimum order quantity? Is that what would impact replacing them, right?
Are they based on what?
Minimum order quantity?
No, they are not. Mm-mm. They are the shipping does adjust based on how many you order, so this is exact to the specific specification.
So if we order one, it
yeah.
would just be whatever the unit charges on that one.
If you ordered one, it would likely be less. Right now, they would be using 2 trucks for the total amount that you have.
Got it.
But we would have to double check with the supplier and just make sure.
Yeah, we asked about, because the company is in Oxford for the picnic tables and benches. But they, that bench is 300 pounds, just one of them. And so I thought maybe Tony could drive up there. And we could save on the shipping, but,
Those,
yeah,
those ones look low. The bistro chairs and tables was the high shipping charge. That's why I was asking them.
Mhm.
So.
They're not from Oxford though.
Right.
Yeah, we're getting a local business for
That's where I just want to make sure if we're ordering one more bistro chair, that that's available. It doesn't have to be a minimum order quantity.
right.
I would have to, I mean, it would definitely be available. I would definitely need to check if they will ship it out, or if someone would have to.
But in terms of where we are, we're option 1 right now, and I think you're saying like 17, 17, and 12, right? So, and we definitely don't pay, I noticed
we don't
on
pay tax.
the Vista seating, there are some questions about estimated taxes or tax exempt. Is there a question whether or not we have to pay taxes on that or no?
You don't have to pay taxes, I think
Okay.
we clarified. Right, Felicia?
Because we are not working with a rep on that one, I would have to finish the checkout process, and so I do need clarification on whether or not they will permit us to waive a tax exempt organization. So that's why it is still pending. I have not heard back from them yet, so I do apologize.
Hey Felicia, if I can ask you a question, we haven't talked too much about the Adirondack chairs, so I guess we talked a little bit about them. But is there, this LOL Designs, to me, a lot of these other items are classic items, kind of specialty. This one's more of a commodity item. Is there anything unique about LOL that makes this different than the 3 or 4 brands I looked at online? I try to remember some of the names. Trex comes to mind.
Sure.
As best I could, I compared the dimensions. They were pretty similar. None of them were ADA compliant, et cetera.
None of them are ADA compliant. I can let Becca elaborate a little bit more, but this was the one brand that was probably the most recommended to me. And as somebody who recently got to sit on them at the Longwood Gardens this past weekend, I can vouch in saying that they are very comfortable and look great. And they are a little bit more of a modern look, but they still have the classic Adirondack shape and form. And so, Becca, if you want to elaborate more on how we've used these in other projects.
I think the other thing about them is that, and I'm just going back to the website, I apologize, is that the particular, that they're a firm with the highest degree of sustainability, and so I think that differentiates them, and I think there has been sort of call that we try and be sustainable with our actions, and there are different ways of doing that, right? So if you buy something that's really historic and it's going to last for a long time, this is, I think, the way that they work with the plastics and recycle. They've won all sorts of awards for sort of their innovation. So I think that's, not only is it comfortable and it kind of looks good and has lasted, but there's a kind of, I guess, ethos and recognition of the company for its practices that also has mattered for a lot of our clients.
Is that HDPE acronym something to do with sustainability?
That's just, it's the way that they, so I'm trying to, I was trying to look at it. So it says, I think they make them out of oak jugs, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
The reason I asked that is that's what I was keying off of, to make sure that any of the other brands I was looking at, I didn't know what that was.
So HDPE is the high density. Yeah, but it is not normally sustainable, but if you're using it all from recycled products, then you get credit for that. So that's one of the differentiators.
My only comment on the Adirondack chair is I feel like we're getting like nice vintage metal, nice vintage wood on the picnic tables and everything else. It feels like, so long as it's built out of like the high durometer wood like IPEG or mahogany or something like that, I feel like the wood would just be a nicer look. And it feels like it's, if we think the wood is durable for the picnic tables and the benches, I mean, is it, I don't know, what do people think about somebody drags like the plastic chair over next to the nice wood and metal bench?
Well, I was kind of going a similar direction. If HDPE is a common thing, which I saw in a lot of manufacturers, I sat on the chairs at the local Dairy and Boat Club, and I think they were Rex or T-Rex or something like that. They were they were comfortable. I looked them up, they have a bunch of different designs, about half the price. Now, I can't compare it to this to know.
Yeah, but I think they're not, I think it's not the recycled, it's just straight up plastic. So that's the
Okay.
difference.
So
That's,
I didn't
but
know that.
again, I'm not,
Yep.
I'm on the, but I think that's why we've had to do so many lead projects
Mhm.
where like you really have to trace your whole chain.
I got
And so we found that this, for people who, many operations groups don't want you to use wood. I mean, so that's part, and I would say there is nothing like wood in terms of its feel, its beauty, its patina, but particularly for furniture that gets moved around a lot and a lot, for public organizations, it can be nice to not be using wood. And I don't know if anyone else wants to speak. I do really appreciate what you're getting at, Jen, because we have, like the Wave Hill chair is also a really beautiful wood chair. There are a lot, I mean, there's a lot of beautiful wood Adirondack chairs.
Yeah, I just kind of feel like we should either go like this manufactured plastic or stick with all the wood, rather than a mix, but I don't know. Just curious what if others feel like they want the mix, would go that way.
So is there, okay, so maybe we hold off on the Adirondack chairs then and do a little more looking and,
They have the fastest delivery. They come 5 days after you purchase them, I think, plus or minus.
Which one, like the plastic ones?
So in terms of if we feel that we need more time, everything else has a much longer lead time. And I think, given the eagerness for people to start being on the island, I could imagine that, yes, maybe you move ahead with everything, and we take a little bit more time and come up with a comparable for the Adirondack. And
Yeah.
everyone can think about it. We can circulate an option. Does that make
I'd
sense?
be inclined to go with Reed's recommendation.
Yeah,
I
me
think
too.
these guys have put a lot of effort into looking at the options. If you find these are very durable, the Adirondack chairs are gonna get dragged around a lot.
Yep.
I've had them also, sure of. They move all over the place.
And they loosen it through the way they move around. I like the wood idea,
Yeah.
but they do loosen.
Hey, does the plastic, do they weigh less, the manufactured plastic than wood?
I would think so, yeah. If you wanna get good heavy-duty wood that's gonna hold up.
Well, I like the idea of the 25 years you had on this, so if it were this wood, that'd be fine, but if it's gonna be, you know,
Yeah.
some
then
other
they're
wood
gonna weigh it
that's
down.
12 years, I don't think 12 years is long enough for life.
So just to be clear, like in my view, I would totally be against wood if we were buying like the light cedar, pine, like that type of stuff that fall, because that does fall apart. If we're buying something with like the durometer of iPay
Yep.
that they use on the boardwalk in New Jersey and so
Right.
forth, I would definitely be forgetting those on the chairs.
Yeah.
In the long run, it'll last and we won't have to replace them with like.
Do you have an idea of the price point, that one option?
I'm wondering what an iPay Adirondack chair would weigh.
I think it would weigh a ton.
I'm trying to look it up as well.
It would also be a lot more expensive.
Oh my goodness,
ePay-
it's $3,000.
ePay these days is also very hard to source. So even if a website says it has it, it may not be able to fulfill your order for weeks, years. It depends. So it's becoming one of those materials that are harder and harder to get.
and it's $3,000?
Mhm.
Okay.
But I mean, I'm doing this live, this is not a full.
Right. I feel like these might be easier to keep clean too. But that's just,
Just
The
to your
trade's not
point
gonna
that,
show
that
up,
and
will it?
the ePay version would weigh 90 pounds and the cedar is 37 pounds. So the ePay, these heavier woods.
This
are-
is 40 something, if I recall.
This is just
Correct,
one.
146.
Yeah. This was the heaviest of the ones I looked at, to be fair, of the HP. What is that?
HPD.
okay, so are we okay with this Adirondack chair? We're okay?
Personally, I think it'd be nice to move forward because we've had our professionals research this, and then if we go back, then it's another few weeks, and this still has to go to the selectmen and the board of finance, and then all of a sudden, something going on.
Well, yeah, I mean, once the board of selectmen approves the dollars, they're not approving like a SKU number.
They're not.
They're just approving dollars.
But don't
Just
they
like the
need-
RTM just said dollars and benches, and the Board of Finance would only approve like that resolution which says dollars.
But are you gonna do an up to, or are they gonna want a little more, like, this is the purchase order and this is how much we're,
I think
how specific are the selectmen and the Board of Finance gonna want it, as opposed to the RTM, which did an up to because it was
right.
early and they were saying how technically they didn't need to approve it at all, but they wanted to set that precedent, I would think, again.
Yeah, the Board of Selectmen, the more information we give them, they will want to know how many, how much. And I forgot to mention, but they said 8 weeks from when we order on the benches and the tables. So, and we're, as you pointed out, we're trying to meet the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance calendar, so. Okay, any more thoughts on this? I did speak with Bruce, and he actually, I want to thank Bruce, I'm sure we all do, for kickstarting this idea. And I think it's going to be terrific for our community once this materializes. So if there are no more questions, I'd like a motion to recommend the purchase of the outdoor furnishings for Great Island as outlined in option 1 with the adjustment on the chairs from 18 and 18 to 17 and 17. And to request the Board of Finance approval in accordance with the RTM resolution.
The Board of Selectmen.
Board of
and
Selectmen,
Finance.
Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, sorry.
I'll make that. I'll
Mark
second.
moves,
I'll move.
Lori seconds.
Okay.
Mark moves, Lori seconds, all in favor? Okay, unanimous. Okay, next item, Becca?
Great. So next, we wanted to basically do our supplemental project updates for the master plan. And we'll just pull that up. Like some of you are going to be really interested in this information, and for others maybe it's not as exciting, but we will get right into it. As just to sort of leap ahead while we're pulling this up, we are very rapidly coming to the conclusion of the master plan and concept plan design. So we have a chance to get to meet with you again on July 9th, as Malika shared, and then the final meeting to discuss and I think vote on this will be on the 23rd of July. And so today the thought is to sort of make sure that any big picture or detailed questions that you all have, that you're able to share them. We will be circulating a draft of the plan to everyone next Wednesday. And there'll also be a kind of cost model that comes out with that so that you can see all the detail related to that. And then this whole phase will conclude shortly. And then the next phase is early access. And then upon the completion of that, or perhaps even overlapping in some cases, the base improvements project, and then any near future approach, and then there's the sort of long-term possibilities phase. So, if we go to the next slide, the master plan development. In our last discussion, and possibly even the discussion before, there were some requests to just have a little bit more detail about how we're thinking about planting, how we're thinking about accessibility, materials, and the infrastructure on the island. And so I thought we could share some ideas about that. We also thought we would share this sort of view of what it will eventually feel like when we make the coastal path, and that is an example of the bench, sort of allowing you to sit along the path and take in the view. If we go to the next slide, this is an overall sort of planting diagram for the future, and we spent a lot of time with you talking about the different planting characters that are on the island and how we can support them even as we make changes. Basically, the sort of orientation to the sun, the height, the depth of soil, what level of disturbance is there or has been there, all of that has impacted what's there now and what we're proposing for the future. If we go to the next.
On that slide,
Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
how do I delineate what's different versus what's there now? Or is this
You don't on that slide. That's just a future view.
Okay.
Great question.
I thought I was missing something.
You are not missing anything. It's just, this is just looking to the future.
Got it.
We can share that difference. We didn't do before and afters, we're only after, right, in this section right now. So we thought, because particularly for early access, if you go to the next slide, there's an idea of really taking that pasture, which right now is actually completely overtaken with a terrifying invasive. It has one of the most scary descriptions of an invasive that I've ever read for a plant. Has taken over that pasture. Swallowwort. But if you want to give yourself nightmares, you can read about it. So I think there was a question recently about whether or not we really need to do anything in that area because it has been a pasture, but I think actually we do need to do something, or that plant will take over the entire island quickly. It's right dramatically adept at colonizing. This character of a meadow, the intention is to make it quite easy to maintain, to kind of preserve that island character that you see with the pasture grasses now, and then introduce some pollinators and some wildflowers. So the list of things like milkweed and coneflower that we're thinking about are there, as well as some standard grasses. And we have used many of the recommended lists from the state, DEP and others, in terms of what the species are that they're hoping that places like this can incorporate.
How do you think about deer resistance? Because I know at least a few of these I've lost completely because the deer enjoy them.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Lori. Our experience is that deer are highly unpredictable, and that if we move ahead with this mostly with a seed mix strategy, that it's been surprising to us how much success we've actually had. So I think deer can terrorize places, but I think our recommendation is that we proceed. The grasses will absolutely be fine, and a lot of the species we're recommending here really spread and colonize incredibly fast.
Becca, this meadow area, is that in the early access phase?
Not the early access phase, because it is really concentrated so much on the west side. The full meadow area that's described here is actually larger, but the
So
area
some
by
of
that parking, yes.
Some of this is included in that?
Yes, definitely. Should I keep going?
Dan, any questions?
Marcus went.
This swallowwort something.
Isn't it creepy?
Is it black swallowwort?
Yes.
Oh my god.
I know.
Now I'm gonna
Well, we in one of the last meetings, I think it was the last meeting, someone said, "Do we have to change it?" And I thought, "Oh gosh, do we have to change it? I should go do my due diligence." And so I went and I did the plant ID, and you do have to change it. It's a strong recommendation from us, which it wasn't in our last meeting. If we can't turn the plant back. Okay, next. That's the only high alert thing that we've seen like that on the island, just to share, which is good news.
Is there poison ivy?
I think I have seen a tiny bit of poison ivy on the island, but it's such a modest amount. I don't know, Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, like spots.
Yeah.
I got a few spots that where people would go, and some in the woods and stuff. But my wife and I walked last week and specifically looked for it.
Yeah.
Not so bad.
No, it's not. I've looked for it. Right.
Yeah.
It's not that it's not there, but it isn't a huge problem. So for the woodland areas, we did identify, in terms of planting palette, some of the species that we're really excited to supplement. And then we also talked about how we try to introduce the next generation of trees, because there is such heavy deer use on the island that next generation of the woods isn't really there, which is one of the reasons you can see so much through the woods. And then you can see the other recommendations that go with that. Any questions about the woodland areas? I think as much as possible, we're really hoping to have a long duration strategy, and using seed and putting in small babies and taking care of them and doing it incrementally. So then we shift to the wetland areas. And how we're supporting those and what the changes are. In many cases, the changes to remove and manage the phragmites and other invasives that are there. In the cases where there are flooded lawn areas, we want to just convert them and have the appropriate native plants. You may all know this, but one of the best things that anyone can do in terms of carbon management is to not disturb wetland soils. So we are going to take a strong line on protecting the soils that are there. And then the limiting of pedestrian access that we discussed previously, which basically allows us to have education on other kinds of enjoyment of these spaces and keep in compliance with the various regulations that apply to the wetlands in Connecticut. Any questions, Jeff?
Do I recall that this is not the full 100% Phragmites removal?
Yes.
So it's 50%
Yes.
or what?
Yes.
What's the difference between the?
Yes, you can see it's a much smaller area indicated here. I think the larger areas that we talked about during your deliberation, I think there is some promising evidence that there are some neighbors that are very motivated to also address the Phragmites.
Options.
Yeah, so that the idea that this isn't something that the town has to go alone on seems to be gathering momentum. Is that fair? Next. So for lawn areas, I feel like Tony has been giving a gradual education to all of us this year. Thank you, Tony, about how to take best care of the lawns on the island. And so we're basically echoing a lot of the recommendations that have been made. We're sharing examples. I think one of the things just to sort of add to that is to increase a little bit of the planting diversity along the edges and make sure that there is some shade and circulation. Some of the lawn areas are really difficult on a day like today where it's really, really hot. And so to make sure that there's a little bit of respite in some of the larger areas.
I don't want to belabor poison ivy, except that I'm highly allergic.
Me too.
But I feel like some of these areas, like the Polo area, it's a great picnic area. And if people are sitting on the ground, like, you're going to monitor that, right?
Yeah, and I think for the Polo area, the idea is that that really will be kept long, right? And so there are, and I guess something, I don't know if it's helpful, Tony, or not, but we could give some even sample mixes for the lawns that have enough diversity, that you don't want a single species, but that you would be keeping poison ivy.
You would check it out? Okay, great.
Any other questions? Okay. The next slide is garden areas, and we're not proposing, particularly given the current sort of thoughts about staffing and trying to keep operations relatively modest. We're not imagining that there's a lot of garden on the island, but having a little bit of a kind of a state garden feels important. So we have identified some small areas by the state house and in front of the stables, and potentially even in the future maybe by the greenhouse and the pink house, where a little bit of planting that is ornamental and has color really feels like it's in the spirit of the island. And these are pretty much all plants that we have found to hold up and have long bloom cycles and sort of work for institutional and park clients. Any other questions?
What deer?
I think it's the same deer. So most of these plants deer don't like
Right.
the Lenten rose and the salvia, for whatever reason they don't eat. They mostly don't eat iris and the crane's bell. I say that, but we do have the Pinnacle hydrangea here. Many people don't have that ever eaten by a deer. Every once in a while, deer decide to eat it. So,
The hellebore they don't touch.
yeah, they don't.
It's beautiful.
It's a great plant, and it is evergreen, which can be very nice too. Okay. I think the last plant combination we just wanted to call everyone's attention is one of the things we haven't talked about for a while, but we did talk about earlier on, was sort of how to sort of deter people from scrambling on the unsafe ledges and rocks without putting a lot of ropes or barriers up. And so what we're sharing here is a sort of planting palette that is not quite poison ivy or brambles, but basically almost deterrent native planting that is kind of evergreen and keeps people away from areas you would prefer probably that they don't grow. And it's consistent with the kinds of species and character that are already on the island. So that is the last sort of planting character we thought we would share.
They stay low.
They stay low. Sometimes bayberry, if it gets a lot of sun, it can get tall. Some of these can get tall, but I think the thought is that in areas where you want to have beautiful views, or you have them now, they would be tall. Any questions before we move on?
So Becca, these plantings were initially, they're related to all phases.
They're related to all
So you're going to
phases.
sprinkle them through.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Small projects that gradually, and it's a kind of thing that there's some areas where even already, I think a little bit of, I suspect if you gave Tony, $10,000 and said, could you use that for planting? There's some areas that you would probably love to add some plants to immediately. And I think the thought is that as we make changes and take care of things, there will be sort of buckets of planting that go forward. And then this gives a clear approach to how all that can happen.
So this is what we would do, not necessarily, but we don't know when we would do it.
Exactly, and I think that what we're basically showing is that with, for instance, the base improvements, there's some changes, there's some regrading. There's nothing that looks worse. You can probably have seen this on different moments in your life where you go and you put in something really beautiful and then you don't treat the edge. So you have something that was beautiful, now it's really raw, you did something beautiful, and you have this really rough seam between the two. So the thought is that as these projects go forward, there's some healing planting to integrate everything that's going to just need to happen. And that this is sort of the way to think about that. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Dan, any questions?
Okay, next, accessibility. We have worked quite hard on the pass system to keep it sort of simple, but thank you for being here, Tony. And to make it as barrier-free and accessible as we possibly can. And so we wanted to share a map that is indicating where we think we can actually achieve ADA compatibility, where we think that we'll just have paths that don't have barriers, which many people with mobility issues can still walk on. And I guess I would pause and ask if there are any questions about this diagram.
Is there any way, I guess the faded gray is what exists there now. I was getting ready to ask you to delineate to, okay, so it's like most of these are, I guess some of these are using existing.
Wherever we can, we are co-opting or slightly modifying.
So Becca, I feel like you said at some point that 50% of the property should be accessible. This looks significantly more than that.
Yeah, so 60% is the target, so we're seeking to make 60%. I think there are a couple of these that may end up being a reach, which I was noting earlier. Like there's one that I think we're not going to, there's one short segment that's coded in the red color, but I think actually when we studied it more closely, we have to remove. So there'll be some, I think, very small updates before we circulate the final. But just to share that we want to be clear about the intention and the criteria for this as we hand this off to you.
Where does the 60% come from?
That is the standard guideline. So we have
Like Connecticut guidelines, or are these like town guidelines, or?
They're federal guidelines, they're state guidelines, and then they're kind of, those are the two common ones, but then there are also, there's like an institute, I forget. So we have a consultant on our team who has sort of guided us. Outdoor environments are kind of special, Jim, because the ground is so uneven. So you're held to a much higher standard if you're a building or a school. We don't have to meet that standard. But the general guideline, when you have a rocky, unruly land and you're trying to make it, is the 60%.
As I recall from working with Weston and Sampson, and also John, that the compliance seminar we went to, it's not like there's just a number and they use it, okay, this is the number, it's just, there's these different
Best
pieces from the
practice.
state and the federal, there's best practices and again, intentionality, but it's not like you can go to a source and Google it and it's gonna just give you like, it needs to be 60% or it needs to be whatever. It's kind of all these different bodies of work that the professionals have to look at and say we're meeting sort of the spirit and then the intentionality of it is kind of what I've learned about this. But there's guidelines like, we learn with like picnic tables, the guidance is usually like 1 out of 4. It should be, on an accessible pad and, have the, one bench missing or whatever, so, but it's not like you're gonna say you're gonna find that. It's a specific, but that's what gets worked too.
But this 60, we sort of set ourselves 60% as what we're seeking to do, but I think also given all the different feedback about how much people like natural materials which are not accessible, that's why we're showing the mulch and sort of barrier-free option, which many people will still be happy with, but it doesn't actually meet code.
Does barrier-free just mean there's no
Barrier-free means, it means,
edges
yeah,
or-
it means there's no steps or, sort of trip hazards, but you're not actually smoothing out that. And it also means it can have a slope of 14% or something, right? So it can be much steeper than ADA would ever allow.
This seems to represent all the paths you're thinking of on the island. Just wondering, on the east side, where the most spectacular views are, I think. Is there not anything between these two outlooks on the east side that's another outlook possibility? A high point that's kind of halfway between those two?
On the, where, you're looking at the green on the
Yeah.
north?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is another possibility, of having something there. Maybe we can take a minute afterwards and look at that. Yeah. Any other questions about this? Yeah.
The ADA accessibility target aspirationally 60%. Do we have a sense, once 23A is done, what's our baseline we're starting with? Are we 12%, 20%?
Yeah, we have looked at that, so we can, that was all as part of our early assessment. We sort of did an analysis about all of that.
Okay. I fear people will lock on the 60 as opposed to where we're starting and being able to demonstrate there's progress going on.
Yeah, so maybe, I think that's a great comment. And so Michelle and Felicia, why don't we work with Kim this week and sort of make a recommendation about incremental change for how you get toward an eventual future? Yeah, because it won't all happen, which is your point. Yes.
But
so
the only
set
number
up
out
a-
there is 60. You fail until you get 60.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, with the work we're doing on 23A, because we're making a major improvement, that'll be 100% accessible. So all the work, the sidewalks, everything that where we're actually improving 23A will have 100%.
Yeah, that's what I'm assuming.
But
That's
I
a good
think
question.
yeah, Craig.
The difficulty, Craig Flaherty, the difficulty with 23A is that it follows an existing slope, right? So this happens with roads that have sidewalks on the edge. The sidewalks are exactly the same slope as the road. If the road is above 5%, you now have a non-ADA compliant sidewalk, but you're allowed to do it because it's a sidewalk on the edge of the road. So it will not be, to the letter, 100% ADA compliant because of the slope of the road.
The other thing I'd caution on thinking about 23A is getting us to our number is, what's the intention of this? And if you're just focused on how do I hit my number, well, yeah, your 23A is compliant, but nobody's going to Great Island to hang out at 23A. So you're not really accomplishing your mission, which is to make it broadly accessible to everybody if you're just lobbing off, trying to get to your ratio just by doing that, because that's not where anybody's going to go. So I really think we have to think back, what are we trying to do when we're trying to make it work for people with true mobility issues, folks who are just older, people with stroller, just all of those different things. It's really making the park work for as many people as possible. So
Yeah,
I don't want to get too hung up on the ratio as opposed to what's the right thing to do.
My question was more, the work that we're doing
Yeah,
all needs to be approved, right? And meets the required ADA
yep.
guidelines for, not guidelines, regulations, I should say, for what needs to get done on 23A, right?
Yep, yes.
Yes.
Yep, great.
Yeah, I am surprised actually now. I just learned tonight that the access isn't going to be ADA compliant. I don't know if that's an issue or not.
You
You have to be dropped off there, is that what that
Yeah,
is?
you gotta get to an ADA parking space or
Yep.
loading zone on site, and then from there, your accessible pathways would start.
But I think what Mark was saying is that it's important to know where we started, but it's also important to catalog our progress.
Right.
Right?
That's exactly right. I don't know what the right answer is and what the right path is, but to demonstrate progress.
Right.
Thank you, everyone. It's a very important conversation. And then related to accessibility, we go to the next slide. The materials that we use, there are materials that are considered accessible and many materials that are very beautiful and sort of natural that don't meet those criteria. And so here, and I think we're trying to get in conformance. There may be a little bit more adjustment that needs to be made, but here we've tried to produce a map for everyone that hopefully will allay the impression that we falsely created that we were going to use concrete paths all over the island in the last outreach event. That was never the intention. We just were using weight to show where movement could go. So this is meant to be very clear that there is an array of materials that we are proposing, and there will still need to be a lot of work to fine-tune exactly how these all work and how they're operated and maintained in conformance with the standards of the town. But this is basically their recipe. And if we go to the next slide, we thought we would share a few images of what those materials might look like, and also establish some criteria for kind of dimensions and relationships that work. So you can sort of see that there are widths that kind of go with, if you want to support someone on a wheelchair, there are slopes and widths and surfaces. Our thought is we are very much hoping, we need to do a little bit more work on this, but we are hoping to potentially use porous asphalt with some kind of very flush stone edging that can be plowable, but that will make the width of the sort of walk that you move along to not feel as though it's a roadway. So for instance, for places like the Southern Causeway, which we need to keep really wide so it can support the fire truck, but we really only want for pedestrian use most of the time, we want to have a solution like this, which is very environmentally responsible, and also has a kind of character that fits in with the legacy of the island. And then just wide mown grass paths are a wonderful solution for a place like this. And if something ends up getting rutted and you need to change it and let it recover, you can just change your mowing surface, your mowing pattern. And we're showing mulch and stone dust for the path. Any questions?
Yeah, Becca, you have a lot of chip and seal. Sorry, what is that?
So chip and seal is a great question. Thanks, Monica. Chip and seal has a number of different vernacular names. Chip and seal, you put down a standard asphalt driveway or drive course. So it has a binder course, it has a topping course. But we've heard from many people in your community that they really don't want that character for any of the paths or walkways on the island. They're fine with that potentially for driving surfaces. But that setup really works well from an operational point of view. To change the character and the feel, you add basically what's called a tack coat. It's basically a gluey, feels like, as it can sometimes be tar, but often it's not even a tar anymore. And then you put a stone top dressing on top and you roll it in, and you do a minimum of 2, you do that twice, so it really gets embedded. And there is an image for Storm King where they can really feel like stone pathways, but they stand up to machinery and to plowing in a way that we have found campuses and other kind of institutions really like. So if you want that aged historic feel, but you also just have the reality that you have your same machine that you're going to use everywhere else in town, this is the solution that we have found gives you sort of both.
Is it possible I've seen that type of application with shells, crushed shells, oyster shells?
We have been talking about that, Mark, how beautiful that would be, and there's a big heap of shells actually on the island already. So I think as the island moves forward, I think the hope would be that there would be a little bit more investigation in exactly the right recipe, and I think it would be quite amazing to have shells as part of maybe the concrete or in the top.
I feel like I've seen that in Savannah, Charleston.
Yeah, and actually in Connecticut, it's an
Here
old,
too.
there's so much oyster shell, and oyster just doesn't want to break down, so it is a great solution, and we think it would be totally consistent with the this is not encyclopedic, just to be clear. This is meant to give sort of the range of the kind of overall character. Any other questions there? And then the next one, I know there's been a lot of discussion about what do you mean when you say boardwalk, or what do you mean when you say terrace, and so we thought we would show a couple of different sort of typical conditions that we have found on the island where we think the need for a boardwalk might come up. And so if it's really a low condition where there's no safety and you just want to keep people on it, we're thinking something a little bit, they would all end up be a match set, is the thought, that you have different conditions where sometimes you need a railing on one side and not on the other. Sometimes you actually need to be held off the ground so you can keep the condition kind of smooth. And then we do think, there's beautiful stone terraces already, and so we want to continue to use that language. Any questions about these? The next is the emergency access page, and there's been a lot of due diligence related to this. I think we need to make sure that that cobble detail is super, super flush so that it gets the sign off that's needed, but we have benchmarks where people plow it and fire chiefs love it, and so we're hoping that we can use a method like that on Great Island as well. But these are the dimensions and sort of agreements that we've worked through for sort of safety, access, and code compliance on the island. Any questions?
Yeah, so Becca, when we were looking at 23A, there was a lot of interest from the community on saving the cobbles. And so I know Ed is looking into if we can do that, if we can reuse them. Do you think that if so, this is a space to repurpose?
No, but coming up, I'll show you one.
Okay.
Just because I think we need that to be really, really level, and the cobbles that you have are more typical. They're very rounded, which makes it harder in terms of plowing or
Right.
maintenance conditions like that. There were questions in not just the last meeting, but the next aside about what level of infrastructure is necessary and proposed as we're making the base improvements, and is it possible to advance to the next slide? Thanks. And so we wanted to share with everyone in a clear way what those assumptions are that we're carrying forward. And the thought is, given that there's so many unknowns in the future about what specific needs will happen with the different structures, we're only going to put the basic sort of loops in so that things can be connected to. But these are those requirements. I'm curious if anyone has any questions about that. Yeah, it's the next slide that I wanted to get to for you, Mark.
I actually had a question about the sanitary sewer pump. Is that some sort of pumping because we're going against gravity?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ding, 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 I got it.
Works great.
It does work great, and yes, they're sort of a pain to cite because they really have to go deep, but
Yes, I get it.
we'll solve for it.
And Craig, didn't we had an 8 and I thought we had a 12-inch?
In Great Island Road today are two empty conduits ready to receive effluent from Great Island. I think One is a 2.5 inch and one is a 3.5 inch. They are part of a low pressure force main system, so they're forced systems.
That's what's down
Already.
along that.
Yes, that's what's down along that, exactly. So depending on how much anticipated activity there is on Great Island, we would either use the smaller or the larger pipe.
And if we used the larger, it would be 8-inch wood,
Well, the
8 inches.
the
for
force
wood.
main you've got to go much smaller. So the force main discharge for a pump is much smaller than a gravity pipe system. So
Okay.
there's plenty of capacity for the types of uses you all have been talking about.
Any other questions? Next. So the next option is,
Just one question about the
Okay,
electricity here, like, is this just the main trunk line, like?
yes.
If we, so that wouldn't limit us from not having lighting around the loop?
No, we're assuming that lighting would go in as part of the base improvements. Yeah, good question. So on the next slide, we're showing the stormwater strategies, and there are going to be strict requirements for how we manage stormwater on the island, and this is where we thought we could use that cobble. And I think actually the historic use is in a sort of drainage channel along the sides of the road, so our thought is that there's a strategy where we can basically make a new compliant use that uses the old material.
Okay, great.
Is it in those hold and release basins? Is that where you're putting it? Just
Yeah,
curious.
well, actually, I think we really like the idea that somehow between where it says direct and convey, the second,
Mhm.
potentially along the walk, so it just sort of has, that, and you would give it a V section or some kind of rounded cup-like section. And then additionally, where you can see, we did a residence in California where we also use it to filter and use grasses on either side, but it can look almost like a dry creek bed.
Yep, okay. Thank you.
Okay, so to the master plan. This is the high-level plan, and we're very excited to have arrived at a plan that we think does hold true to everything that people love about the island, but does introduce several of the accommodations that people have been craving. It, I think, represents fairly modest change. It is not a radical transformation at all of the island. It's quite quiet in terms of the set of changes, but we really do see it being totally transformative for the town. And then, I don't know if there are any things people would like me to particularly call out. We have a sort of phasing walkthrough that I can go to next. Yeah,
Just
Mike.
in terms of, process and ultimately considering and approving the plan, I know we will get a draft, et cetera. It occurs to me that with regard to the structures, I know that a few weeks ago we talked about it in general, way, but I'm certain that my colleagues on the Board of Selectmen, when we get this plan, they're going to want to know what we think about each of those structures in the very near term. Are we carrying them? Are we going to recommend? And I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I feel like and my recollection could be wrong, but it was like a general sense of like what people thought. I think that we're going to need to give them, and Jim could probably say whether or not the Board of Finance will want this, consideration specifically of each of those structures in the near term. So in addition to approving or whatever the plan on bank, I think we need to go back and then specifically address what we want to do in the near term with each of those structures.
We are, so in our, I can touch on that as we walk through these phasing, but that is absolutely our intention. And that is what is baked into what we're going to be sharing with you next week.
There's no White House on this, so that's one. Not to get ahead of it.
Right, well,
there's one.
which is fine. But
Yeah.
Yeah, but I totally appreciate that that's a necessary piece of this, absolutely. Any other comments about the overview before we walk into the phasing components? Okay, great. So next, so phasing, put a kind of dash around the phase 3C because that's the area, I mean, Mike sort of building off of what you're just saying, that is going to be much less defined. So for early access, which is the first phase, if we go to the next slide. This is, I think, the sort of part of the plan that has received the most discussion in our meetings, and in some ways, actually quite a bit of attention in the field as well. We have identified the different components here. We've tried to be clear about what the direction of flow is. We also, in the last couple of sessions that we've had, there's been discussion about is there any capacity for lawn overflow. So I think in the last meeting we had with you, we talked about that basically flat disturbed area that doesn't have very many trees at all in it right now, being able to use that potentially for temporary overflow lawn parking, number 6 in this plan. We thought we would quantify for you very clearly the numbers of parking spaces and bike racks that we're proposing in this. And then you can see the basically lead seller project with a little sort of forecourt room. I think that thought that there is a place for people to be able to step out of the rain and also potentially cool off, which I think is on all of our minds today, and get oriented is included in that. And then the change, because I don't think we looked at this closely with you all before, but to make sure that that is a gendered bathroom was a request. And so that's what we're showing there. Included in this project is all the necessary enabling utilities and infrastructure, wayfinding, signage, lighting, which Jim, you were getting at earlier, the meadow planting, and a very sort of light reforestation along the edges of the woods there. And then very importantly, the gate system to control access, both at the southern causeway to keep that safe, and the sort of continuing route around the arms, and that's number 7. Something that is important is to have a drop off both up high and down low. I think that, you know, it is hard to walk up and down, so we thought it was important to have a way to let people get out of a car down by the boathouse as well as up in front of the greenhouse. Are there any questions?
Two comments. One, cobblestone pad under the bike parking. Could those be your cobblestones as well?
They potentially could. We could look at that.
Yep.
if they're level.
I don't think they are.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And the second question, I'm not a bathroom expert, but is there a changing, as in for babies or kids, so
Yeah.
maybe to
In
entice
the
people
back.
not to use our picnic tables? for
In the
that?
back,
There is.
the back room, if you look
Is
at
it?
the drawing.
Oh, is that what that is?
Yeah, there's like a
You need
nursing
your
room.
glasses.
You know, I saw that. Looks like a lounge chair.
Is that the nursing room?
Yeah, the nursing room.
There is a lounge chair for the nursing room.
And for, I guess, the fathers, you can do it in the utility closet. We maybe have gotten carried away with our delineation, so we'll make sure it's neutral from the capacity to take care of other people.
I like the bike racks, so it looks to me like you have three, okay, so, you like that setup, that spread out as opposed to a couple with 30 spots for each?
Yeah, our
dispersing?
experience with bikers, bicyclists, is that they really are going to want to bike to where they want to go. And so distributing options for all the places that are around the
Makes
allowable
sense.
place is how you get the best behavior out of people. Otherwise, they kind of just put their bike wherever they want.
You go to the closest spot and leave it there.
Any other questions or comments?
Then on the welcome area, it would be great to see a little bit more of what you're thinking there.
Okay.
Like, what are those boxes? Are those tables or? I think that from the sinks on, but I think the welcome area is pretty big space. What are you envisioning?
We can do that. I think George is very excited. He was.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we can provide more information. Any other questions?
The greenhouse there, is that contemplating wings on it, or?
Not as part of this. That's just showing the current footprint. Thanks, back. I was wondering if that was
The foundation.
Yeah.
And I thought we had discussed taking the greenhouse and making that be some type of welcome.
We did
Sunday.
not as part of early access, just because of budget. We're trying to keep. We've had. There's been a way in which, in some ways, the early access project has had a little bit of scope creep because we've added the bathrooms, and so it's a bigger project now than it was before originally. And I think if we could get momentum for that project, it would be amazing. I mean, I feel like in terms of not what we have to do, but I have shared this with some people. I think the idea that if we could get to a place where this part of the island really feels totally taken care of relatively quickly, it would be enormous.
I think we should look at what the expense of, if the welcome area is just an area versus if we're making a lot of investment in it and then we're going to, just like 50 feet away, turn the greenhouse part of that into the welcome area. I think we just want to be careful that we're not spending too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just redoing it 6 months later.
Yeah, we can check that. And possibly that's a good thing to look at next week, or not next week, but on the, okay. Any other comments?
No, so back of the overflow, it's 15 on each one of those green, right?
Yeah, it might be 16 and 14.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Okay.
Just one of the questions I raised before, and I think others have talked about, even from residents, is have you thought about any, small and, ways in which we could tell people before they even drive on to 23A, whether there are or there are not parking spots, like in terms of using AI or other types of things that they use in garages now, because it would, I think one of the things we discussed we'd like to stay away from is we don't want people just kind of coming in and doing a curiosity loop if there's truly no parking. So is there a way to?
I think that's a totally great question, and the answer is yes, and I think we could add that as a note, just as that project moves forward. I think the more we can do to be kind of transparent and communicate well about all this, or to have your learning.
What do you mean specifically by overflow in a sense? Is there something that has to be physically open and made accessible by someone under certain circumstances? Or is it just extra? It's like at Wheat Beach, we have the paved lot, and then we have the overflow.
Green is the lawn,
which is,
I think.
It's meant to be lawn, and I think our thought is, and I think this can be always subject to discussion going forward, but I think our thought is to keep it as a lawn area that people would also walk around in. I think potentially initially having some level of special permission so that I think the number of events that are being requested is quite, or you might decide to open it on Saturday and Sunday afternoons or something, and the rest of the time it's closed off. I think we have many places that we work with where they use lawn parking. You need to give the grass time to recover, so it can't be every day. But we did hear in all of our discussions that that this really isn't that much parking, and having the possibility to have pulses where you can have a little bit more would be really, really helpful for the community. So that's how we solved it.
But just to be clear, this space will not be open on an everyday basis.
I think at least in the initial phases, that is our sense, that, and it doesn't seem like it would need to be, but if there was a big community event, or, I don't know, it seems like you could say, in August, every Saturday and Sunday and Wednesday afternoon, it's gonna be open. I think that's the kind of thing where you can stay in control of what makes sense there.
Well, because is it to get from like the purple visitor parking to get back to the, drive back onto the lawn, you need to kind of walk on, is that like is that a
We would
people
keep that
path in the
open.
middle?
It's a people path, but it's just mulch. So, yeah, I think that's fair, with making sure that it works beautifully. It might need, we've tested most of these radii and have it all engineered. I think this part needs a little bit more tweaking. Yes, Kim, sorry.
It's reinforced lawn, I remember.
Yeah, we have called it out to have it be
Yep, I
reinforced.
In prior meetings, weren't we talking parking quantities of over 100 at some point? Now
We
we're
did
down
have,
to
we
55.
did have parking quantities that were over 100 by adding more, double loading the road, and I think as we looked at that more closely, it felt as though it wasn't gonna be as nice a solution. And also the circulation, the option that we looked at that got the most of that was quite tortured. And I think the conversation was that keeping everything and everybody moving more smoothly was better than having a few more spaces. So this is a very sort of straightforward vehicular flow pattern.
And what about for the parking, we had also, to Dan's point, had looked at when you come up the northern driveway, when you get to like the greenhouse on the left, there's a couple sort of pastures down there that I thought we could also, which didn't really sound like they were gonna be used, but that could be a place we could plant some trees and have 30, 40 spots down there.
I think going forward in terms of overflow, there is more flexibility. I think this is meant to be the first project. It's not the only parking that you all have.
I think the other thought that, I think people like this parking because it was kind of out of eyesight, right? And that's what we were trying to do is keep it in one area and not as obvious.
But if, like, this lawn parking ends up working for you all, the idea that there could be other places on the island where you could use that strategy and you would basically have a parking management approach, I think then that's how you would think about it.
I think the additional, the 65%, I think that's really gonna help too. I think that's gonna open up a lot of flexibility for folks. And within sort of those interim distances and stuff.
Any more questions? Any discussion, Monica, that you want to have?
Nope.
I think this is the part of the project that we have the most detail around, so I did want to give ample time to talk. Okay, so then into the next part of the project, 3A, which we also have, I think, a lot of conviction and clarity around, maybe not quite the level of detail, the base improvements. So base improvements is basically the list of things that we believe are very important to have happen quite quickly to really take the island from its residential character to a full of humanity. So at the top of the list is to make the changes to the Southern Causeway to really make it function beautifully as a walkable, strollable way onto the island, while also meeting the other criteria as it relates to safety and fall prevention and the kinds of vehicles that need to be supported. And so you have a little key section, number 5, kind of showing some of the strategies that want to be included to get that to work.
What can we do since we don't own it?
We would work with the current owners. We have an easement over it, so obviously anything that we do, we would work closely with the neighbors.
But I think that to the extent that we're aware, they like that. I think they're pleased with the idea that it would be mostly pedestrian, and I think the historic character of the whole island is also in their interest, and the sense that, and I think everybody wants it to be a safe condition. So, but we think that that's the sort of number one thing to do, so that as you arrive, it just feels like you're at the right place, and whether you're in a car or you're on foot, it's just beautiful. The second thing that we have identified is the necessary building envelope and structural stabilization so that the buildings don't deteriorate, the ones that we're keeping, don't deteriorate any further. So it's a sort of minimum amount that came out of that set of inspections and reports that we made. And for each building, it's a slightly different recipe and a slightly different cost. There's basically a little bit of attention required to keep all the buildings in decent condition going forward. The third piece that we're recommending is a site-wide landscape management and planting approach, and this basically will enable the team that's taking care of the island to be clear about what their guidelines are and what the sort of standard of care is. It's not meant to be a huge investment, but just to sort of have what any good park has. I'm sure you have things like this for most of your public spaces. Then something that has gotten maybe more attention than any other thing that we've discussed, site-wide pedestrian trails. And you can see those are labeled with number 4. So the hope, and the sort of new ones are related to being able to get coastal access. And they come with different sorts of details to support them. 5, safety improvements and code compliance. So that relates to the fire access and emergency care and barrier planting to protect from basically to protect people. 6 is the site-wide vehicular improvements, and that's to make sure that in case of emergency or maintenance need, vehicles can get where they need to go. And then the last thing is the enabling utilities and infrastructural improvements, which we touched on a little bit earlier. And then I guess I'm just curious if there are any questions about this.
So this kind of touches on the question you were asking. It looks like every building is being
Every building that
stabilized.
isn't being removed will have, and there's a cost and a sort of recipe that is totally specific, like a doctor's report. And some it's really not very much, and then some it's a little bit more. Okay, there aren't questions there. If we go to page 3B, near future projects, we kept this list pretty short with the idea, I think that given all the conversation, that there's a sense that there's still a lot of open questions and the community really wants to take things slow. And so the projects that got the greatest degree of excitement from everyone are the carriage house and the supporting area around it, the wetland. And then the partial renovation, basically that most limited renovation of the stables. So pretty low cost change, but enabling use there. A few landscape improvements around the stables so that everything is safe and works well. It's pretty, I don't know if you've been around the back of the stables, but there are a number of pretty hazardous conditions there. So sort of taking care of that so it really becomes a safe public place with a little bit of parking and utilities. And then the coastal trail that we spent quite a bit of time talking about in our last discussion. And there's a tremendous amount of study and development to make sure that that works in terms of its dimensions, materials, and kind of conformance with standards of care along the coastline.
Regulations.
There's a lot of regulations that apply, but as everyone has mentioned, there are also a lot of places where people have worked very hard to give access along the coast because it does contribute a lot to everyone's well-being and understanding of the environment. So that is not a small undertaking, but I think really important one that people are excited about. Yes.
I'm a big fan of the patio of the estate house as being accessible to people. Is it safe? Can it be used as it is, or does it need some sort of restoration or work?
It needs a little bit of, I think, restoration. I think we can look at putting a little bit of that into the base improvements, which I think we have, right, Michelle? Into the forecourt?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it does, that seems like such a low level to get it to be safe that it feels like you want that to happen pretty quickly. And especially if we're putting furniture there.
The estate house.
Okay.
Oh, the estate, I thought you said the staple, sorry, the estate house.
No, the estate house.
Yeah.
We can add that to the list of near term. I think it didn't get full endorsement from the full committee, so right now it's in our near.
I think when people get on the estate lawn, they're going to want to walk up.
I agree with you, but so we're calling it out as something, but it didn't make our cut we tried to be, based on your feedback, this is a very conservative list for the near future, and they were the ones that really seemed to get kind of almost unanimous.
Put it as a first alternate.
Okay, we can, if your community appears on this committee, we'll support you on that, Dan.
I raised some questions on that. I think people are gonna naturally want to flock to that, but I think the large elephant in the room is if we're gonna be making improvements, are they extra small, or medium to those patios? It just begs the question, what is our short, medium, and long-term plans for the actual estate house itself?
I think it's a fair, so I guess, so Dan is sort of making a informal move to add the patios around the terrace in front of the estate house into the 3B near future projects. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
When we discussed this last time, if I can, it was what improvements were needed to the patio, but then accessibility to the patio became a question.
I think the issue was that when we looked at the sort of amount of investment and the questions, it felt like it's a big enough project that it needs to be understood with some other things also needing to be understood that we don't have a route to know the answer to yet.
So maybe we could look at, instead of, I get Jim's point, we don't want to fix up the terraces if we're never going to use the building, right? Well,
I think you do.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
I
that's
should
what we
say
were
that.
saying. I think the
Yeah, I should
terraces
say
you
that.
do want to fix up, but I think the question, I think there's a big question about how quickly some of these larger decisions are going to become clear. Like, are you going to end up with some partners or some organizations that are extremely gung-ho, that have the capital, and these kinds of things are going to move swiftly? Or is it going to all be sort of just banked and more like a museum backdrop or a film set, the way it sort of is operated?
I think it would be sad to have caution tape in front of the steps.
Yeah.
When you've got this beautiful lawn.
Yeah.
Listen, if it's $100,000 to kind of fix it and have people be able to go and kind of get up on there, sit down, or like enjoy it, that's one thing. If it's multiple millions of dollars to do it, it just sort of, I feel like it necessitates advancing the discussion around what we want to do with the house.
So maybe, I'm going to put forward an idea. Could we basically put an allowance toward improvements for the terraces at the estate house and basically try to advance a solution that is something like $100,000 to get it safe and usable, and just put that as the goal? And if it's just not possible, that's a level of design work and discussion that we haven't gotten to, but it could be done, and there's a sort of feasibility if we can get there for $100,000.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that like threshold, like safe and usable, may not be glamorous, but to get it so people can go up there because everyone's going to actually
not
go.
very
Safe
Barricaded.
and functional, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a particular period. I mean, you're not gonna improve the terrace to last for 10 years if, you know, in 10 years, there might not be a consideration because of other factors. So, I mean, in addition to the cost and the quality and making it user safe, there's the length of time that you're making that improvement for. And I would say that in regards to the terrace, would be
10 years?
more like 5.
5, okay.
So maybe add to the charge, safe, usable, and functional for the near term. Right.
And I think all we have is caution that people are gonna go up there anyway.
Well, that's why I'm saying.
Yeah, you're right, yeah.
Right.
But I
To
feel
have
like,
it
Tape or no
safe.
tape, they're
I
going up.
feel like the base improvement for that, the structural, I feel like there was a lot of work done in that terrace area, because there is some.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, but I think that it isn't bringing it up to usable. So I think what I'm hearing in the room is let's spend the least possible amount with a cap sort of not to exceed, to try and bring it up to safe and usable with it as a sort of short-term fix, because it is a kind of attractive nuisance and it's also spectacular. So in terms of things that I think we believe the community would love,
Yeah.
being able to set up there is high on that list.
If we can make something that's high value with some relatively low cost, shorter term improvements.
Love it. I
That
love
could be
it.
something. If it's very large,
Yeah.
you know.
And I think most likely if the whole estate house does get upgraded, it will be large. Mike, to your point, right, it is something that merits investment to be brought up to the kind of standard. But hear you. Any other components that we're missing here?
Not on that, but the carriage house and the wetland, can you just remind me what the wetland piece of that entails? Is it terrace on the back or is it restoring the wetland?
It's a little bit of the restoration, and it's being able to walk from the carriage house in both directions over the wetland, and it's changing the planting there because it's that sort of leaf litter and then inundated lawn, and became accessible, is I guess the last thing. Yes. Dan?
Right, on all the buildings that are listed in the prior slide, the beach house isn't mentioned, or the squash court. Do we not need to do any building envelope or?
That will,
improvements to
so
the beach
in what we
house?
share with you next week, that's all called out. There are a few.
It doesn't have
improvements.
two on it on that prior slide, so.
We didn't, so in an effort to be succinct for the conversation tonight, and maybe we're overly succinct, we didn't put numbers on every single thing that is included. There, it's a little bit illustrative. In that the plan is much longer, and it has detail about all of these things. Do you want to add any color to what I was just saying?
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, in the cost, we're carrying some level of stabilization, but I think we have a little bit more detail on all of the historic stone structures, because those were the structures that were really detailed and surveyed by WJE and provided the really clear recommendations. So there's like an allowance for stabilizing the structures, but the ones that have that recipe card that Marcus talks about are the historic stone structures.
The only thing I would maybe throw out there, because Dan started it, is, you know, I know these are all distinct pages, right? But some could kind of flow into what happens right away, what's necessary, what happens short term, medium term. You know, the carriage house, given that we need to do a fair amount of structure, or some structural improvement to the roof, there's like the slate roof, shingles that need to be fixed and so forth. You know, that does seem like a relatively obvious near-term, like, wow, like making like a real investment where people could really begin to use that. You know, so I'd be interested to know what could a base improvement, you know, beyond just fixing like the walls and the roof to the carriage house be? Because by doing that, we're kind of creating bathrooms that are accessible to the outside and so forth.
Let's go to the next slide.
It's on the next slide, right? Is that what's part of the near term, right?
Yeah.
That's
So
that
I think
detail.
our thought, Jim, is that potentially, depending how swiftly this moves through the process, you could be in a position where you add one or both of these projects with the base improvements. There's nothing to say that this doesn't happen in the next 3 years or 2 years.
Well, yeah, and I guess I was even going back to again, we've lumped these into buckets like early access, right? You know, just thinking about like the bathrooms and everything there, like should we just be doing the carriage house because that's only 150 yards away and that's gonna have bathrooms that are accessible to the outside?
Our recommendation would be, if you're able to find the funds, that you would do all the phase 3B projects with all the base improvements. So that your early recipe is these projects now with Dan's added terrace and the base improvements. And I think that there's a question as the costs become more real about whether or not that's actually viable. But if you want to know what your design team thinks, there's such excitement in the community about these. And I think, Jim, to your point, I think if you do these with the base improvements, you are giving so much, and there's still so much left to do on the island, but these are really transformative projects for how people get to experience the island.
I was kind of hearing the question, my mind was going to possibly flip-flopping the sequencing of the root cellar bathroom and possibly this building.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, save a little bit maybe on.
Not to say one gets eliminated.
I think the challenge is that the root cellar bathrooms because you're providing the parking there, that just in terms of how people behave, and I will just share this because whatever, this is fine. I'm an expert at this, I'll just take it, I don't normally say that, but like, what do people need to do when they get out of the car, particularly if they need to use the restroom? And it doesn't feel very far to get from a parking spot to the carriage house, but if you have a small kid or you have someone that's just having a hard time, it's a huge distance. And it's not really an accessible solution.
But what also my assumption is that people aren't traveling like an hour and a half to get here. They're traveling like no more than like, I think 4.5 miles to get here, so.
I think when we did canvass a lot of people about that question, I think given the use and the population, to have 2 sets of bathrooms is just sort of totally standard for a property this size with the kind of use you're going to see. So I don't think there's an over-investment in that if you go ahead with this. I don't know if you have, because you're the other person that
I mean, we don't have
operates.
bathrooms at every park, but, I know people really like at least that there's a bathroom available all year round. And it makes it a much more useful park.
My comment, I think was what Mark was saying, is if we're gonna build bathrooms, maybe we could just think about saying, let's just build them next to the carriage house and start working on the carriage house.
The quantity though is significantly different too. The
Yeah.
carriage house has 8 toilets, men and women's, whatever, and the other one has 5 toilets for men and women, so.
I would recommend that you proceed with both, and that you'll get enormous, contentment from your community if you're able to do that. Any other questions?
No, and I would just say, going back to that, I think the size of the island and I think the proximity of the root cellar bathroom, and I think also while we're under construction, it would be great to get it all done at one time as opposed to trying to work in 2 spaces. So I envision that the carriage house bathrooms will be popular, but I think this is a good place to start.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Thank you for the discussion. So future possibilities. This is the list of things that we largely heard endorsement about, but it's not as clear how quickly they can all happen, but they all made everyone's sort of high priority list. And so starting with number 1, it would be a full renovation of the stables and grounds. I think, again, there just needs to be a little bit more clarity about the use and who would be operating that. 2, full or partial renovation of the estate house and gardens, and it's the same sort of criteria, which is you need a partner. 3, the idea of a visitor amenity and possible facility, even boat facility or some other kind of facility, and terrace at the boathouse. 4, the renovation of the greenhouse, which I think there is a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for. So the way we're thinking about this is that the timing, all of these are projects that could go instantly ahead if you find your partner and you have the sort of capital case to be made. And so if for some reason, I think I can't remember who was mentioning it before, but that the greenhouse, that there's a clear partner and that there's a case for fundraising, that project could be added even into the earlier projects. The renovation of the restoration of the glass houses that would complement the greenhouse, renovation of the playhouse and gardens as a rental space, the nature play area and family shelter near the arrival court, forest play area and learning shelter at Scott Hill, kayak launch and pavilion at the beach, pending study, and then ongoing landscape management and planting. And I'm curious about thoughts about that, Mark. Yeah.
Question on number 3. I'm trying to understand what, I know it's subject to a use, identified use, but I'm not really clear what that one is.
So I think we had shown, I think that the option that we studied, right, which we shared with you, is the idea of some sort of combination, something like a concession that you have at your other parks or beaches. It has had a past history for boats. It could be used in that way too. We didn't draw up all possibilities for that.
Okay. So the ranking here isn't necessarily.
This is not a ranking in order of like what we're nominating.
Nominating or feedback from surveys. It's just the ranking.
This is just all of these have basically gotten, I would say, a very high level of endorsement as directions that people want to see. And I think the way we've understood the message from the community and from you all is that at the moment there isn't a clear enough case to have confidence to move ahead to fund them, but they are sensible projects. And when you get to be in a place where you have a partner and you have the ability to fundraise for them, they could move very briskly. And I think some of these lend themselves to almost entirely philanthropic sort of cases, and others, there may be some civic organizations that want to, some town operations that could move to the island, and they might truly be town-funded improvements.
The only one in that seems kind of odd or sticks out to me is the last one, which is the ongoing landscape management and planting. I mean, the rest I understand their options, but to me that's almost needs to go into an operating budget.
I think that
we covered that in the plantings. I thought all the landscape items.
Yeah, but
we always have to do ongoing landscape management.
Right.
Yeah, you do, and so that's why we mentioned it, Laura, because I think it felt strange to. I sort of, and maybe it's not stated exactly. So maybe we need to state it differently. But there's a way in which this suggests that there aren't projects that are just landscape oriented that wouldn't need to happen. But I think our sense is that as you start to use the island more, you will discover that there are projects that don't have a building or aren't about toilets or aren't about utilities, but are really about taking care of the plantings and the island itself that will end up moving forward. We just don't know what they are at the moment. So if you have thoughts, we'll think about it. If there's a different name, I agree, it sounds more like operations.
Yeah.
We'll try and come up with a name.
Well, we kind of list it in early access. We listed in A, we listed in B, so I guess the question is, if we're listing in all, we don't have to list in any, it's just part of, if it's not something specific.
Yeah, the thing is, what I want to make sure of is that in your budgets going forward, there's a row for this, because I think it doesn't do you any favors from a financial point of view to not be planning to make investments for the care of a landscape.
Yeah, we know that, and that's why, to me, having it in future, we're using the word possibility, to me, we saw that in our parks for many years, and we let invasives take over.
Yeah.
And it's been a huge project to kind of get that back under control. And I want to make sure as operating budgets for y'all are being built, now we build in money every year for invasive management.
And we are, in the budget that we're building for you, we're including that. I would love it if you all would give some thought to this question. What we have seen too is that if you don't have lines in the budget for taking care of the sort of planting and soils and things like that, it often just doesn't happen. And so what I want to make sure is that there's provision for the kinds of projects that are maybe supplemental, because every once in a while you need to do like a planting project.
I consider this new plantings actually, that's someplace we're gonna put in a garden, or we're gonna put in
That's
some
what I'm
shrubs.
thinking.
So maybe you put in, call it supplemental plants, something like
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
just, to me, to have the word possibility and just ongoing,
So could we say gardens and what?
Maybe just incremental rather than ongoing, right? Because it's just,
But I think that's a project that you could get fundraising support for, so figuring out the right wording for that.
Okay. I'm gonna say gardens and maybe habitat improvements or something, because there's two different ways of thinking about it.
Yeah, and then Becca, before I forget, I would just, going to Mark's point, it looks as if these are ranked, so I would just do it,
Bullet.
by direction,
Okay.
so.
Well, you
start-
could go to A, B, C, D, I guess, instead of.
Yeah, switch our methodology. Nice
Yeah.
idea. Thanks.
Yeah, but I would like, if you're gonna start with the stables, then I would have number 8 would actually be number 2.
Okay.
We talked last week or last meeting, I guess, about kayak launch
Yeah.
at the boathouse area. Only primarily maybe because it was a shorter haul from your car to the boathouse than it was to the beach. And so is that a future possibility,
Yes.
consideration
Yes, and
someplace in there?
Yes, and in the more extensive write-up for the boathouse, we spell that out. This is like the true summary slide, so, yes.
I think I've mentioned it before, that's very important to have an island you can't beach a kayak or launch a kayak from. It's just asking for people to just do it anyway.
Yeah.
Wherever they
Well,
want.
yeah, I mean, because I think you want to get 9 taken care of, because I believe under Connecticut law, like anything that's covered by water at high tide is open game. So people can,
So should we move 9 into 3B? It does need more study, and we did sort of agree that we need to do that study. We just don't have the answers. Should that shift?
I would move it into 3B, but when I think about that, the big decision and cost behind it is not going to be allowing people to launch their kayaks. It's going to be what we do with that wall. So I would maybe describe it as, next steps on whatever you call that wall, that title.
Seawall.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
decisions on
swimming
tidal
pool.
wall
Yeah.
and launch and swimming, whatever.
Okay. We will list that accordingly. That's great. Any other feedback? Okay, so then we have one slide on the phases of work, and listing them out, and then these are the really bulk numbers that we think kind of capture what's listed. There's some shifting. We're actively going back and forth with the cost estimator. Michelle has talked to them something like 75 times in the last 7 days. And we will be distributing the sort of initial model as a complement to the draft that we share out with you next week when we circulate this. And so then we come to next steps, and basically the idea is that we meet on the 9th with you all to pick up and discuss any comments from the draft we'll circulate next week. And then you'll share those comments, we'll incorporate them, recirculate the draft with the hope that there is another review and a recommendation in the meeting on July 23rd. And then we've noted here what we think the steps are to begin the early access. There is quite a bit of work on both finalizing the specific scope, assembling a team to do that work, preparing the design so that it can go through the approvals process, and then preparing the bid documents once you have basically an approved approach to the design, and then the incorporating of the qualified low bids to go through the request for approval, and then the commencing of construction and creating of an operations and maintenance plan. And then we've also indicated some longer term things here. I think what we wanted to stress is that there are some amazing attributes of your community, and one is your ability as a town to self-finance things that you prioritize, and then the second, and to operate them. And then the second is your ability to actually raise philanthropic monies to support things that you all care about. And so the thought really is that unlike for some organizations or municipalities that we work with where we have to be really clear about what has to happen when and in what order. You all do really seem to possess the ability, if it becomes a major priority for this community, there's a way to have a champion and to get something to happen. So we're not being overly prescriptive about which of these projects needs to happen when. It's as soon as you have enough momentum and you have the capital and you have a leader and the town board of selectmen and others support that direction, we believe that this project will be able to get on board.
But you did prioritize them
We
for
have-
us,
we
which
have-
was really
yeah,
helpful.
Yeah, so I think the things that there's clear priorities that have come forward, we are being clear about, but there are a lot of other ones where there's been a lot of discussion and attention that you just don't have a champion or you don't have the capital, and it doesn't make sense to really start the process until that gets in place. Just discussion.
Where did any necessary P and Z approvals fall in?
So we have
Order.
a map, and the different projects have actually different recipes that need to follow, and we've worked with Craig and some others to map out basically the order of operations for approvals for the different kinds of projects. And so I'm sorry that's not such a specific answer, Lori, but because it isn't a one fit.
Okay, but it's in here because it wasn't
It's not
referenced
spelled,
in here.
yeah, we didn't spell out, so, but also like EPC and DEEP, and there's a lot of approvals that that there's a very lengthy approvals process for everything that we're talking about.
I am, that's why I was wondering, that we guys kind of
That's
everything
what-
here made it sound like,
so-
boom, boom, boom,
No,
here we go.
and actually I'm glad you mentioned that because actually I had a brief conversation with John Zagorski about our expectation that it's probably going to take a year to get the documents through approvals before you can be able to go after bid, even for early access. So we don't want to create a false impression that these things are going to move quickly. And I think we have learned lessons about the earlier process, and we're going to seek to do everything possible, I think, in terms of what we're offering to you to set you up for as much success and speed as possible, but it's just not likely to be super, super fast. And if you just think about how much time we took tonight to talk about the furnishings, this is an island that requires care. It's so beautifully, the way it is now is so beautiful that trying to, I don't know, Kip, do you want to talk about it? I don't know how much more we want to spend thinking on this, because we're just listening to things on the agenda.
Yes, any more questions for Becca on this? I forgot we do have it there on the agenda. Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Becca.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, moving on.
Is Reed Hildebrand part of the future items on the agenda?
No. Reed, would you like to leave? But yeah, this is going to take.
Yeah, no worries, I just,
literally.
I do sort of want to see that.
Yeah.
It's very tempting, so, but if it starts to take on a long conversation, Mark, I think we would love to take you up on your offer to excuse yourself.
Your choice.
I think, Michelle, are you going to put, or Felicia, are you going to put up Mark's, Kip's website? Did you ask, Kip?
Yeah, I could do that if you guys.
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, one second. Sure.
So we've talked about merchandise a lot, and here are the samples. If anybody didn't see them last time, these are some of the items that are on the website, right, Kip?
Yes, yeah, so there's 6 items on the website: t-shirt, long sleeve shirt, sweatshirt, 2 polos, men's and women's, and a hat. So we're starting with a limited number of items, and we're going to see how they sell, and if there's any need for expansion, we can easily revisit and add, and add colors, add styles, whatever we deem necessary. But this was the starting selection as recommended by our vendor, Campus Customs. So pass a couple of these each way.
And Mark, Kip, I'm sorry. This is the next one. What's the price spread? So people could purchase something.
Right now, they are priced with, I need to confirm, it's either a 25 or 30% markup. So we have flexibility, we can move that around and play with these price points a little bit, but these were recommended by the vendor. So it's $25 for the t-shirt, $30 for the long sleeve, $84.99 for the sweatshirt and polos, and $31.99 for the hat.
Okay, so something from, sounds like from 25 to 85.
Correct.
Perfect, fits everybody. Okay, any more questions for Kip? Okay, then I'd like a motion to recommend the proposed merchandise website and product offering to the Board of Selectmen for approval. Does somebody want to make that motion? Jeff does. Second, that would be Mike. All in favor? Unanimous. Terrific.
Just one question on this. Are you expecting that the town will be the vendor, or just technically we're making this site available for residents to buy? Like, I'm just trying to understand, like, do we expect like the costs and the sales to run through the town's balance sheet, or sorry, income statement?
So the site is hosted by our vendor,
Yeah.
and all costs are covered. The items aren't shipped until they're purchased, so there's no cost to the town. So
then we just get a small amount of
any of the markup.
So what did they send us, like a check monthly or something?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that probably will go into the operating fund?
I'd like to swing out.
Okay, so we'll let town decide where that should be, where that ends, sorry, dollars should go. Okay, any other questions for tonight? All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mark moves, Mike seconds, super. Meeting adjourned. So all in favor?